For some people, it's all about the little details. I am actually not one of those people. But we will get to that later. We are going to have an exciting video, I think, today because most of you are anticipating that in this video we will solve the puzzle of that misfire on the Toyota with the number 6 cylinder that gets coolant in it and misfires for a brief period of time, but we can't figure out where the coolant's coming from, and it's negative on all the tests that would indicate that's even the problem. But most importantly, before we get started, I got to get paid. The last customer that I had was actually a local artist here in Denver. And, ooh, good, I love bubble wrap. I'll play with that later. And as payment for replacing a clutch master cylinder on his Volkswagen, he has been kind enough to pay me in a most unusual way with his most unique style of art. And because today's theme is about puzzles, I'm going to give you guys a little puzzle that maybe you will enjoy. So you will immediately recognize what this picture is, and if you think you know the answer, put it in the comments. What is it that is unique about this drawing of my garage that he did by hand? See if you can find out. Okay, think you got it figured out? If so, go ahead and put it in the comments section. We'll see if you're right. And also, if you're needing a little more help or you're just interested because you really got to check this guy, Johnny Applegate, out with Future Drawn Studios here in Denver, Colorado, I will put in the video description a link to his YouTube page and his studio page. And you will be blown away, especially you guys that have that kind of engineering mindset. Johnny actually a mechanical engineer, and his art definitely reflects it once you figure this out. So, more on that as Johnny actually will do some artwork for the title page on the channel in the future and things. So we'll get to that later. Right now, let's get to this mystery on this car. So let's review real quick. We've got an 04 Toyota, a 4Runner, V6 engine. And what we ultimately found out is that there is coolant getting into cylinder number 6, which is causing the symptom of a misfire on number 6 for only a few seconds after startup, maybe 20, 30 seconds after startup. Generally when the weather is really cold, although I'm kind of starting to question if it's just with startup after a while and the coolant's building up. Now, the problem is that most people would immediately jump to a head gasket, of course, which is what her mechanic did. The thing is that I had diagnosed an intake manifold gasket leak because there is no loss of compression in the cylinder. The compression test, negative. Leak down test, negative. Chemical test for combustion leak, negative. So the thing that I concluded is that, well, with the negative compression test, the coolant isn't coming from the compression chamber. It's not a head gasket. So I concluded it would be a leaking intake manifold gasket. However, the problem is there is no coolant through this car's design of intake manifold. It is a dry upper and lower intake manifold. The coolant, therefore, must be coming from the cylinder head, but no compression losses. So my thinking, of course, is that it's probably a crack in the coolant channel above the combustion chamber where it's dripping past the intake valve and getting into the cylinder that way. That would be my guess. But a lot of people are saying, no, on these cars it is the head gasket, but nobody's been able to really show proof, such as, no, it's a head gasket because we had this happen. We replaced the head gasket and there was no more leak. We haven't seen any evidence to that regard yet. One of the most important things with this, and why I really need to find out where the coolant is coming from, is not only so much to potentially fix the problem, but more importantly, if it is coming from an area within the combustion chamber, this is a major diagnostic issue for me, because it would mean that I cannot rely on a compression test or a leak down test. The two tests that I have always said, they never lie. No loss of compression. You don't even need to do the leak down test. But if your compression test is negative, leak down's negative, it's not within the combustion chamber, and a lot of people are saying that is not true. So we have to find out if it's leaking within the combustion chamber, because that means I need to rethink my infallibility on those critical tests and come up with some other methods to be able to do those tests more accurately in these engine designs, and actually in all engine designs. Even if you have a wet intake manifold, you still could have this phenomenon, right? So that's what we're going to do. The woman should be dropping off the car any minute, and this is what our plan is. Of course, most of you guys on my pay channel know I have a Borescope. Also, I did this. I went out and I bought an adapter, number 12025, that is the correct one for this engine that I did not have before. The strategy is going to be as most of you have indicated, and that is I am going to pressurize the cooling system, and then we're going to use the Borescope to look and see if we can actually find the leak in real time and where it's sourcing from. So we're going to do this a couple ways. One of the other things is I believe actually we're going to have the best chance of catching it with the engine warm. If you think about it, because the leak is coming from the coolant side into the chamber, it has to be when the cooling system is pressurized but the engine is off, and that would most likely happen when the engine is warm, of course. So we're going to try it with both a warm and cold engine anyway, but we're going to pressurize cooling system, and the first thing I'm going to do is go through the spark plug hole. We're going to see if we can find any evidence that it's leaking within the combustion chamber. If it is, well, that changes everything. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close the intake valve, and I am going to look from the top of the intake valve, and I guess I don't really know how this cylinder head's designed. We should also do it from the exhaust valve too, perhaps, but most likely it would be from the intake valve. And we're going to feed the Borescope from the top of the engine to the intake valve at number 6 with it closed. And if we see coolant pooling up on that intake valve, I'm going to be a happy camper, with keeping in mind it's still a kind of fatal issue for this car owner. But what that would mean is that the coolant is leaking from outside the combustion chamber, and my favorite tests, the combustion and leak down tests, are absolved and still, at least for me, infallible. And I'm going to also make the claim that that is also the case for other people who have seen the issue in this car, and that it is not actually a head gasket, that it's from outside the combustion chamber. It makes much more sense to me. It explains all the diagnostics. So let's get this car in here and we'll get started. All right, well, here it is, and what we're going to do is actually, before we get to the Borescope, I want to address some of the good comments that we got with some people that had some relevant ideas. One of them is that maybe my leak down test was negative because it is such an incredibly small leak, and that I would have to give a lot of time for the pressure to build up to bubble out of the coolant. And we've seen previous videos where I've done leak down tests, and immediately, as soon as I seal the cylinder, the coolant bubbles out from the radiator, and definitely we're not going to see that, but maybe we'll see some little bubbles or something if I did the leak down long enough. I definitely agree. This is going to be a very, very minor leak for sure, and I imagine it's probably even aerosoling into the cylinder. But the thing is, again, if it's going directly into the cylinder, I still expect we would have lower compression in the cylinder, but people are saying maybe not. Let's go ahead and do the leak down test, and we'll do it for a long period of time and see if we get any result. I just want to show you this real quick for any 98%ers out there. One of the things, of course, is reading spark plugs, and it's generally a parts changer technique where supposedly you can look at a spark plug and tell exactly what's wrong with the engine, and it generally involves you need a tune-up, in which case the customer comes back because it doesn't really fix the problem. You can definitely see evidence here with the number 6 plug that the insulator is darker, the porcelain there is definitely darker than the number 5 plug here on the right. So definitely evidence something going on in the cylinder. If, obviously I'm going to get people that are going to look at that and go, oh, yeah, I can tell you that's coolant. If you've ever changed spark plugs before, plugs always look like that. But, whatever. Anyway, that's just for some of you guys who are interested. We took out the number 5 plug because we're going to use it for comparison if we need to. And I'm going to get my leak down test set up. However, it occurred to me during the time getting the plugs out and everything, the car has been sitting for a couple of minutes. with the engine warm, pressure in the coolant obviously still. So let's go ahead and just run that Borescope down real quick. And I don't think we're going to see anything quite yet, but let's just see if there's any evidence of some coolant in that cylinder. All right, we'll try to do the best I can to keep this focused on the camera. I don't think I actually have the SD card to save the video on here, so we'll do the best we can, and we'll feed this down into the cylinder. And let me get there and adjust the camera afterwards. So what we're looking at here is the piston crown, and looks pretty barren and dry to me. Looks maybe in the camera, I'm looking at the video camera, and it may look like it's a little wet. That's just the light shining on it. Kind of back out a little bit. It definitely looks pretty dry. Spin around a little bit. We can see a valve recess there. One of the things, if you do this on a car with a typical blown head gasket and you pressurize the cooling system, when you look in here, you'll just see the crown of the piston covered in coolant, almost submersed. I'm not expecting to see that here. Now, one of the problems is I'm not going to be able to look backwards at the cylinder. I'm trying to catch a cylinder wall. And I can tell you this piston is actually fairly far down in travel. It's probably closer to bottom. And I'm trying to bend the camera. Oops, a little bit too far out there. I'm trying to bend the camera a little bit here so that we can look at a cylinder wall. I don't think I'm going to actually be able to do that. One of the things I can tell you is that what we aren't seeing is a big giant puddle of coolant anywhere, that's for sure. Then again, may not be enough time for it to have pooled up. So what we'll do is let's get this leak down test, and then I'll pressurize the coolant system, let that sit for some time, and try to see if we can get coolant in there to just proof of principle to conclusively show the coolant in the cylinder. All right, while I get ready for this leak down test, just want to remind for some of you guys that know, I do my leak down test a little differently based on my understanding with this. And typically most people are taught for a leak down test, you bring the piston up to top dead center compression stroke, obviously, and you want to bring it exactly to true top dead center so that the piston rod is exactly parallel to that crankshaft journal. And the idea is that if it's off even just a little bit, when you add your compressed air through here, it's going to be no different than combustion. It's going to push the cylinder down to the bottom. But if you're at exactly true top dead center, you're just pushing that piston straight down on that crankshaft. And if it's truly lined up right, it won't rotate. And that's how you build your pressure. The only problem that I have with that is it only really tests for the valves in the head gasket pretty much and the very top of the combustion chamber. The way I do mine actually is different. I actually set up first and then add my compressed air and then rotate the engine until I get the piston on bottom dead center of the compression stroke. And that way what I'm doing is I'm testing the cylinder walls as well. And if you have it at true top dead center, you're missing all the cylinder walls on your leak down test. So I do mine a little differently for that purpose. Hopefully that makes sense. So what I want to do now is hook up my compressed air. All right, I think we got everything in the shot here. And one of my challenges is to not cause a false negative by bumping the radiator hose here, which of course, here's our coolant. You can see where we can create activity in the coolant just by me brushing that. So, Dale's dog's going to be barking this whole video, I bet. Let me just top this off a little bit more. And I want you guys to follow along. Oops, a little bit too aggressive there. So follow along here. Let's think about this. If this test is positive, if we bubble the coolant out, well, then a compression test doesn't mean anything because the compression was exactly the same in this cylinder versus one on the opposite bank. And having a positive leak down test, this can only be positive if we have leakage in the combustion chamber. Okay, so you can see the dials moving now. I can't really see it in the video camera. Let me get another click on the wrench. See, that's just me spilling the coolant. Okay, now we're going to hold this. And again, that coolant you saw bubbling was just me hitting the radiator hose. And I'm just holding this in place. Oh, well, that is definitely not me. Look at that. Well, I'm not sure why it's positive now. My guess is because the engine's warm, but look at that. It's definitely blowing. Oh, man. All right, well, there you have it. That's all we need right there. Look at that. It is bubbling over. Let me try to get a little more pressure on here. Yeah. It's definitely bubbling. Yep. It's spilling over. All right, well, compression test doesn't mean anything. Unbelievable. All right, so one of the things is right now it really, that kind of ends the video, to be honest with you. Let's talk about this real quick and do a couple of other things. Wow, just wow. Okay, so obviously what we're going to do is we're going to do a compression test, and we're going to see if now we see a difference. Again, I've done this before. The leak down test with the engine cold, and I don't even remember if I did it with the engine warm or not. I'm sure I did. And I can tell you, I held it in place, and it's hard to hold it in place, by the way, but I held it in place for easily a minute and didn't see any reaction. I called the test negative. I was prepared to do that for at least 2 or 3 minutes today. And there's no question about it. There is compression leakage into the cooling system, but you guys saw it on the last video. You saw it. The compression test was identical in cylinders across banks. And the relative compression test showed it was no different than any other cylinder. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that test with the compression. Actually, first I'm going to strangle Dale's dog. Then we're going to repeat this compression test. And if that compression test shows to be normal, well, first of all, congratulations to you guys who were right. We don't know if it's a head gasket, but it doesn't matter. It is a leakage in the combustion chamber, and a leak down test showed it, but a compression test didn't. And initially, my leak down test didn't either. Let's do the compression test right now, and then we'll talk. But this in itself, you guys saw it in the last video. You saw it. The compression test passed. And I wish I did a leak down test in the last video, because that day that I did the leak down test, I can tell you it was negative, and now it's not. Leak down test doesn't lie when it's positive, but apparently these can lie when it's negative. Let's get let's do this actually, just to see that there's more evidence. It's not going to be conclusive, but more evidence that this is from the gasket. Let's bring it up to true top dead center, repeat that test, and then also I don't have to hold it in place anymore. If it still leaks like that, that dramatically increases the chance that it's a gasket, because we're taking away the possibility it's a cylinder wall leakage. So let's do that first. All right, we've got this set up now, and I am at true top dead center compression on cylinder number 6. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep an eye here for any bubbles or anything. Let's see if we can line some light up on there. And I've topped off the coolant again, and we're going to look for coolant bubbles out of here like before. The difference now, of course, is that we are not including the cylinder walls. If we get the same reaction out of here, then pretty much it's almost guaranteed a head gasket. Almost guaranteed. Bottom line is it's definitely in the combustion chamber, and can't really explain that based on the last video. So let me get out of the way and hook it up from this side. And we're going to watch. As soon as I hook up, I'll move the camera and we'll move right onto the coolant and see if we can catch bubbles. So going to hook up, should hold pressure. There it is. And oh my God, look at that. The coolant is absolutely bubbling over. I'm speechless. Okay, whatever. All right. Well, you know, we don't even need the Borescope or anything anymore. I'm gonna say I don't even care if it's a head gasket or not. It's a head gasket, but it doesn't matter. We have a compromise in the combustion chamber to the coolant. We saw in the last video, compression test was negative. I'm going to go ahead and set up the compression test right now. We better see low compression this time. We better see it. So let me set that up. We'll see what happens. All right. Well, that is definitely problematic. What I'm actually hoping for is that we do, of course, see evidence of low compression on this, because what that would do is indicate that there was just some condition at the time that I did the testing where the testing was accurate, and there was not at the time this issue that we have today, which conclusively is the problem. So let's set this up, and I'm hoping that we see lower compression this time compared to cylinder number 5 on the other bank. So let's zoom in on this. I don't remember what it was in the last video. Do you guys remember? I want to say it was like 170, something like that. Get the glare off here. And let's fire it up. Oh, shoot. Speaking of that, I don't want to fire it up. I have to disable the fuel first. Oh my gosh, I'm glad I said that. All right, hold on, guys. I'm going to be right back after I get the fuel system disabled and we do this right. Okay, that's one of the things when you're distracted with the filming. Not that that would have been disastrous or anything, but we really just need it cranking, not running, to make sure that we do this right. Would have just made a lot of noise. All right, let's get zeroed back on that gauge, and let's see what happens. The reason the cranking sounds so funny like that, by the way, is remember we have our number 5 out, which is no big deal. Looks like it reads about exactly the same. Let me get you a good look at it. One of the things with the camera work too is this phenomenon where you can change the reading a little bit based on what's called parallax, the angle you look at it. Some people mentioned in the last video it didn't look like the compressions were the same. Let's go ahead and move over to the other side. Let's go to number 5. And I got to tell you, it's going to read the same. I already know that. It's too close to what the reading was last time. The relative compression test validated it. This is going to read 170, I can tell you. I don't even know what to say. Let's go ahead and just prove the concept here real quick. And then, well, we got to talk. All right, hopefully that gauge will stay in place. Let's back up a little bit just in case it doesn't. And let's see what happens. This thing better read like 190. Ah, dang it. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see what it says. Golly, look at that. Let me set this in here, and also let me just really jam it in here and see if I can get it to hold. It reads exactly the same as cylinder number 6. I'm kind of pissed right now, to be honest with you. All right, let's take a look at that. That is off due to parallax. Let me straighten the camera out because it's really important now. But even just a few PSI difference really doesn't matter. You can get variation on healthy cylinders. That's the reading. Let me take a look at it with my eye dead on. It reads exactly the same as it did on the other side. I can't even believe it. Exactly to the PSI. All right, guys, I am going to admit I am a little bit speechless. Look, I'm so pissed off I didn't even change into my promotional merchandise. I didn't give a rat's ass about that right now because I hope you understand the significance of what happened here that we caught live on camera with this channel. We have a known, I'm going to say a known head gasket failure. It doesn't matter. We have a known combustion chamber compromise to a cooling system that a compression test fails to detect. I hope you guys understand the significance of that. As for the leak down test, I can't explain why we saw such a dramatic evidence with the leak down. And don't forget, the leak down test is pushing from the combustion chamber out just like a compression test does. One of the difference may be that flap effect that I was saying, where you also have an intake stroke on a compression test. You don't have that on a leak down. I don't know. One of the things I may do is, actually while we talk, I'm going to put that pressurizer on real quick. We're going to just see if we get the coolant in the cylinder head, which we know we will, but just to show it on camera. I hope you understand that there's no point in my doing this. This is just simply because a lot of you guys like that Borescope, and it'd be kind of cool to see some coolant flowing in there. And what we're going to do is pump this up, build up a lot of pressure, just let that cook. And I may let that cook actually for a couple hours. Okay, get that good and pressurized. I'm going to show you the gauge here so that we can measure the amount of decay that we get, which of course would be coolant leaking into that cylinder. And I can tell you it's, my eyesight's not what it used to be, I can tell you that. It's just about 20 psi that I've got this set at. So we're going to let that cook for a little bit. We'll see how much it decays. All right, we'll let that decay a little bit and push coolant into the cylinder, if it even does. I don't know anything anymore. But and then we can just maybe use that borescope just for fun to see if anything is in the cylinder. But again, it doesn't matter. We know our real problem isn't if we don't see coolant in the cylinder. I don't even expect to. A real problem is the fact that the compression test lied. I mean, and that's the thing that I want to talk about is, as a scientist, this is the part where you really struggle with. Now, actually, I kind of don't, because I know there is a logical, rational explanation for what happened here. I can't think of one, but there is one. And maybe we'll be able to find out what it is. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to dissect this thing. Somebody had mentioned there's a certain construction of the head gasket, and I'm going to definitely reread that comment, where it explains this, because the construction of the head gasket, when you do the compression test and leak down test, and don't forget, everybody's also explaining why the leak down test wouldn't work, and it did this time. Unfortunately, we didn't do it in the last video. The bottom line is that there is an explanation for this. I just don't know what it is yet. And as a scientist, the struggle is how to find out what it is and how to prove it. And then also for me, how that's going to modify my testing procedures. Now, for people without scientific mindset, this is actually very easy. And this is the part as a scientist that you struggle. I'm going to hear from that guy that said that my using a Chinese scope on a relative compression test was the stupidest thing he's ever seen. And he's going to come back and he's going to say, see, I told you. And he's so stupid that he doesn't understand that the scope worked. It is conclusively proven that the scope worked. He doesn't even understand that the compression test worked. The compression was the same on a bad cylinder and a good cylinder. You know, that's the part that gets you frustrated. So for the smart people, you just got to, it irritates you, but you got to move that aside. The problem we have is that compression tests can lie. Compression tests can lie. It's 100% a fact that a compression test can lie. Now, I'm also telling you that a leak down test can lie, because I did the leak down test. And man, I mean, you could tell there was absolute compression in that cylinder, because it was really hard for me to hold that pressure in the cylinder with the leak down test for like a minute or so, and I didn't see any evidence of anything. And then now I do it and it just bubbles out like we typically see. Don't have an explanation for that. I'm just telling you guys, I hope you believe me, that didn't happen to me the last time, and it shows me to now do these things on film, I guess. But anyway, where to go from here? Well, where we go from here is I do want to try to do some research, find some explanation on why we see a compression test can lie. I also am not sure that I'm going to be able to repair this vehicle because of some time constraints. You know, I kind of want to dissect the thing, obviously, and see if we can see an explanation for this phenomenon. We'll have to see if we do that in the future at some point. I'm going to tell the lady she has a blown head gasket. I'm going to have to swallow some crow on that one. Luckily, she's a nurse, and she has a very good science background. She understands. She'll watch this video, and she will understand how I came to the conclusion. And I guess I definitely have to owe it to the shop. It's a leak in the compression chamber. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, but my apologies to the shop. Again, I wouldn't have sent her home with new spark plugs. I don't know how they did the testing, but ultimately they did make the correct call, I believe. There's no question in my mind. This is a blown head gasket, and it passed chemical test. Maybe we should do a chemical test. You know what? I'm not going to do a chemical test. It doesn't matter. The compression test lied. The compression test lied. All right. I'm going to have to absorb that. In the meantime, you guys, do me a favor, please. Two things. First of all, any ideas that you have that explains this phenomenon, or if you actually know what it is, and only if you really know, please put it in the comments. I really would like to have an explanation for this. The second thing is, please do me a favor. Check out my buddy Johnny Applegate's site. I'm going to put it in the description. And you got to look at this guy's artwork. It's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And he'd appreciate it, and so would I, actually. So on that note, compression test can lie. Son of a bitch.